Good evening, and welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. I'm glad you're here. Wherever you are listening from tonight, perhaps lying in bed, perhaps letting the day slowly loosen its grip, this is a place where history does not rush, does not shout, and does not demand answers all at once. Instead, it settles in quietly, like a lamp being turned low in a long hallway. Tonight, we are going to drift toward one of the most familiar shapes in human history. A shape so well known that we almost forget to truly look at it. The pyramids of ancient Egypt. They appear in textbooks, documentaries, postcards, and dreams. They rise from the desert with such confidence that they seem to belong to another world entirely. And perhaps because of that, they have gathered centuries of whispers around them, stories of impossible strength, secret knowledge, and explanations that reach far beyond the human hand. But this story is not about hidden machines or visitors from the stars. It is about something much quieter, and in many ways, much more remarkable. Tonight, we will gently explore how the pyramids were actually built, not in a way that takes away their wonder, but in a way that brings it closer to us. Closer to human breath, human patience, and human time. So allow your thoughts to slow. Let the desert air cool. And follow me back, not to a moment of spectacle, but to a long process measured in footsteps, shadows, and years. The pyramids feel impossible not because they are unknowable, but because we approach them with the wrong expectations. When modern eyes look at the Great Pyramid, they often search for something dramatic. A single breakthrough. A lost device. A secret that explains everything at once. We are used to inventions that arrive suddenly, machines that replace effort, technologies that compress time. But the pyramids do not belong to that kind of world. They were not the result of a sudden leap forward. They were the result of persistence. And persistence, especially on a massive scale, is something we rarely see anymore. To understand why the pyramids still unsettle us, we must first notice how we measure achievement today. Speed matters. Efficiency matters. Individual genius is celebrated. We like stories that move quickly toward a clever solution. The pyramids offer none of that. They rise instead from a culture that measured success differently. A culture that accepted slowness as a strength. A culture that believed meaningful work could stretch across decades, even generations, without losing its value. This is difficult for the modern imagination. Standing before the pyramids, many people instinctively ask, how could humans do this? What they often mean is, how could humans do this quickly, with limited tools, and without the kind of machines we rely on? The quiet answer is that they did not do it quickly at all. They did it slowly, deliberately, and together. Another reason the pyramids feel impossible is their scale. Human perception struggles with extremes. When something becomes too large, too precise, too enduring, we stop relating to it as the result of ordinary actions. Stone blocks that weigh as much as entire houses do not feel like objects that can be nudged, pulled, and adjusted by hands and ropes. And yet, that is exactly how they were moved. Not all at once. Not in dramatic lifts. But inch by inch. Guided by experience rather than force. There's also a deeper emotional reason the pyramids feel distant. They come from a civilization that thought about time differently. Ancient Egypt was not focused on short lifespans or quick rewards. It was shaped by the steady rhythm of the Nile, by seasonal flooding that returned year after year, by a worldview that placed great importance on continuity. In such a world, a project that lasted decades was not unusual. It was expected. The pyramid was not seen as an interruption to daily life. It was woven into it. This challenges another modern assumption, that monumental achievements require extraordinary individuals. We often imagine a brilliant architect standing alone, directing the work with perfect foresight. But the pyramids were not built from a single vision frozen in time. They evolved. Plans were adjusted. Methods changed. Knowledge accumulated slowly, passed from one group of workers to the next. Mistakes were corrected not through sudden insight, but through repetition and refinement. This is not the story of a miracle. It is the story of a process. And processes rarely feel exciting when told too quickly. But when we slow down, when we allow ourselves to imagine the sound of stone scraping softly against sand, the steady pull of ropes, the long pauses between movements, the pyramids begin to feel less like riddles and more like conversations across time. They are asking us to reconsider what humans are capable of when patience replaces urgency. Perhaps the pyramids feel impossible because they remind us of something we have largely forgotten, that endurance itself can be a form of intelligence. That coordination can be more powerful than invention. And that history's greatest structures were often built not by defying human limits, but by understanding them deeply. As the desert night settles around these ancient forms, the mystery does not disappear. It simply changes shape. The pyramids are no longer impossible. They are human, quietly, stubbornly human. And as we continue, we will move closer to the people themselves. Not the legends, but the hands, the routines, and the lives that slowly brought stone into order. For now, let that thought rest with you. If you have ever heard a story about the pyramids involving visitors from the stars, forgotten supermachines, or secrets deliberately erased from history, you are certainly not alone. These stories have drifted around the pyramids for decades, sometimes whispered with excitement, sometimes declared with great confidence, and often repeated late at night when the desert seems vast enough to hide almost anything. There is something comforting about them, in a strange way. Because they allow us to keep the pyramids at a safe distance, wrapped in mystery, protected from the ordinary world of human effort. And yet, what is most interesting about these myths is not whether they are true, but why we want them to be. When people imagine that the pyramids required help from somewhere beyond Earth, they are often expressing a quiet doubt about human patience. We live in a world where large projects are delayed, shortened, redesigned, or abandoned when they take too long. A structure that demands decades of focused effort, without shortcuts, feels almost unnatural to us. So the mind searches for a faster explanation. Something dramatic. Something external. The myths, then, are not really about ancient Egypt at all. They are about us. It is worth noticing how these stories are usually told. They tend to begin with astonishment. Look at the size, they say. Look at the precision. Look at the weight of the stones. And then comes the gentle suggestion that humans alone could not have managed such a feat. This suggestion is rarely stated outright. Instead, it lingers in the background, inviting the listener to feel clever for doubting conventional explanations. But there is a subtle cost to this kind of wonder. When we replace human effort with mystery, we quietly erase the people who were actually there. The planners who counted seasons instead of hours. The workers who learned, through repetition, how stone behaves when pulled, pushed, and persuaded. The communities that accepted a project larger than any single lifetime. In truth, the real story of the pyramids is not smaller than the myths. It is simply slower. Archaeology, unlike legend, does not move quickly. It gathers fragments, compares traces, and builds understanding piece by piece. It rarely offers a single dramatic answer, and perhaps that is why it struggles to compete with stories that promise instant revelation. Yet what archaeology reveals about the pyramids is quietly astonishing. Not because it suggests impossibility, but because it shows just how much can be achieved when time itself becomes a tool. One of the most persistent myths is the idea that some crucial knowledge was lost, leaving us unable to understand how the pyramids were built. But knowledge does not always vanish in dramatic collapses. Often, it simply changes form. In ancient Egypt, technical understanding was passed through practice, not manuals. Skills were learned by doing, by watching, by repeating movements until they became instinctive. When those practices ended, the knowledge did not disappear in a blaze of secrecy. It faded gently, like a path in the sand slowly smoothed by the wind. This is far less exciting than a hidden chamber filled with blueprints. But it is far more human. Another popular idea is that the pyramids were designed and executed as a single, flawless plan from the very beginning. This image appeals to our desire for control and clarity. We like to imagine that perfection comes from knowing everything in advance. But the evidence suggests something different. The pyramids were adjusted as they rose. Techniques were refined. Decisions were revisited. The process was responsive, not rigid. In other words, the builders learned as they went. This idea can feel unsettling, because it replaces certainty with patience. It asks us to imagine a world where progress does not come from sudden insight, but from accumulated experience. A world where mistakes are not disasters, but instructions. And perhaps that is why myths rush in to fill the silence. They offer certainty where history offers process. Yet, if we listen carefully, there is something deeply calming about this slower explanation. The pyramids were not built in defiance of human limits, but in careful cooperation with them. Stone was not conquered. It was negotiated with. Weight was not ignored. It was respected. Time was not an obstacle. It was an ally. When we let go of the myths, the wonder does not disappear. It simply changes tone. Instead of gasping at an impossible mystery, we begin to admire an extraordinary balance of organization, belief, and endurance. The pyramids become less like puzzles and more like conversations, carried out over decades between people and their environment. This kind of wonder does not demand excitement. It invites reflection. And reflection, especially before sleep, has its own quiet power. It reminds us that history does not always advance through dramatic leaps. Sometimes it advances through steady footsteps, taken day after day, by people who trusted that their effort mattered even if they would never see the final result. So as the myths soften and drift away, the pyramids remain. Solid. Silent. Patient. Not as evidence of something beyond humanity, but as proof of what humanity can accomplish when it allows itself to move slowly enough to listen. And in that silence, there is still mystery. Not the loud kind that demands belief, but the gentle kind that invites understanding. Soon, we will move closer still, toward the people themselves. Toward their lives, their routines, and the quiet rhythms that made the pyramids possible. But for now, let the myths rest. The real story is waiting. And it does not need to shout to be heard. As the myths begin to loosen their grip, something interesting happens. The pyramids do not shrink. They do not become less impressive. Instead, they begin to feel closer. Less like objects placed on Earth by some distant force, and more like the result of countless human mornings, afternoons, and evenings, quietly stitched together over time. In Session 2, we allowed the louder legends to fade into the background. Now, in that calmer space, we can finally notice the people who were there all along. For a long time, the most common image associated with pyramid building was a grim one. Endless lines of enslaved workers, driven by force, collapsing under the weight of stone and authority. It is a powerful image, perhaps because it matches other stories we know about ancient power and suffering. But power does not always operate in the same way, and archaeology, patiently and without drama, tells a different story. The people who built the pyramids were not anonymous masses without identity. They left traces of their lives behind, and those traces speak softly but clearly. Near the pyramids, archaeologists uncovered the remains of carefully planned worker settlements. These were not temporary camps thrown together in desperation. They were organized communities, complete with sleeping quarters, bakeries, storage areas, and spaces for rest. This alone tells us something important: the builders were expected to live, eat, and work there for extended periods, not to be used up and discarded. Even more revealing are the remains of food. Bones, grains, and pottery fragments suggest diets that were surprisingly rich for the time. Bread, beer, meat, and vegetables appear again and again in the evidence. This was fuel, of course. But it was also care. A workforce that is meant to endure for years must be fed well, not just fed enough. The pyramids were not raised by desperation. They were raised by maintenance. There is also the matter of burial. Some of the workers were buried near the pyramids themselves, a location of honor in ancient Egyptian belief. Their graves were modest, but respectful. This is not how a society treats people it considers disposable. It is how it treats contributors. So who are these builders, really? Many of them were farmers for most of the year. Ancient Egypt's economy revolved around the Nile, and when the river flooded its banks, fields could not be worked. Instead of seeing this season as wasted time, the state redirected labor toward large projects. Building the pyramids became part of a broader rhythm of life, aligned with the natural cycle of the land. When the waters rose, hands turned to stone. This seasonal rhythm changes how we should imagine the construction process. The pyramids were not built by a single, unbroken workforce laboring endlessly. They were built by waves of people, returning year after year, bringing experience with them. Each season added another layer of skill, another refinement of technique. Knowledge accumulated quietly, carried in bodies rather than books. Within this workforce, organization mattered deeply. Workers were divided into teams, and those teams often gave themselves names. Some of these names survive, carved lightly into stone. And they reveal something unexpectedly human. They speak of pride, humor, and identity. These were not faceless labor units. They were groups who knew who they were and what they were contributing. It is easy to overlook how powerful this sense of belonging can be. When people see themselves as part of something larger, endurance becomes possible. The pyramid was not just a royal monument. It was a shared effort. A visible sign of participation in the cosmic and social order that ancient Egypt valued so highly. This does not mean the work was easy. It was physically demanding, repetitive, and slow. But difficulty alone does not define cruelty. What matters is whether the effort is acknowledged, supported, and woven into a meaningful structure. The evidence suggests that pyramid building, for many, was exactly that. There is a quiet irony here. By imagining the builders as enslaved, we unintentionally strip them of agency. We deny them skill, organization, and pride. The myth of forced labor becomes another way of doubting human capacity. Just as the myths of alien intervention do. Both remove the builders from the story, leaving only abstractions behind. But when we allow the builders to return, the story becomes richer. We begin to see the pyramids not as monuments imposed upon a population, but as projects sustained by cooperation. Cooperation between the state and its people, between planners and workers, between generations who trusted that their efforts would matter even if they never saw the end. There is something quietly moving about that trust. To lift stone day after day, knowing that the final shape would be completed long after one's own hands had rested for the last time, requires a different relationship with time than most of us have today. It requires faith, not in miracles, but in continuity. As night settles over the pyramid fields, it is easier to imagine these people at rest. Conversations fading, fires dimming, muscles tired but minds steady. Tomorrow, the stones will still be there. And so will they. In the next gentle stretch of our journey, we will step even closer. Not to the grand organization of labor, but to the small details of daily life. To the routines that turn immense ambition into manageable days. For now, let the builders stand quietly in your thoughts, no longer hidden by myth, but present, human, and patiently at work. After meeting the builders themselves, it feels natural to wonder what their days were actually like. Not the grand moments imagined in paintings, with endless stone blocks and dramatic gestures, but the ordinary hours that quietly filled the space between sunrise and sunset. History often remembers beginnings and endings. Yet it is the middle, those repeated, unremarkable moments, that truly shape great works. The pyramids, for all their scale, were built one ordinary day at a time. The day likely began before the heat had fully claimed the desert. As the sky shifted from deep blue to pale gold, the worker settlements stirred awake. These were not silent, joyless places. They were villages, alive with movement, conversation, and the small rituals that help people face long hours of labor. Bread ovens warmed. Water jars were filled, and tools were checked, not with urgency, but with familiarity. There was no need to rush. The stones would wait. Work did not begin with spectacle. There were no horns announcing destiny, no dramatic speeches about legacy. Instead, groups gathered as they always had, divided into teams whose members knew one another well. These teams had names, identities, and rhythms. Some specialized in hauling stone, others in preparing surfaces, others in maintaining tools. Each role mattered. But none stood alone. The pyramid was not built by individual heroics. It was built by coordination so practiced it almost disappeared into routine. As the sun climbed higher, the work itself unfolded slowly. Stones were not lifted in sudden triumph. They were persuaded. Ropes tightened. Feet dug into sand. Voices rose not in command, but in rhythm, helping bodies move together. When progress stalled, it was not a failure. It was a signal to pause, adjust, and try again. There is a kind of quiet wisdom in knowing when to stop. What is striking about this daily labor is how little it resembles the chaos we might expect. There is no evidence of constant desperation or collapse. Instead, there are signs of structure. Regular breaks. Scheduled meals. Time to recover. This was not kindness in the modern sense, but it was practicality. A workforce expected to endure must be cared for, or it simply will not endure. Meals themselves were moments of brief relief and social connection. Bread and beer were staples, familiar and sustaining. Meat appeared more often than we might assume, suggesting that strength was valued and maintained. These were not feasts, but they were far from minimal. Food was part of the system, as essential as stone and rope. As afternoon arrived and the heat pressed down, tasks likely shifted. The heaviest work may have slowed, replaced by preparation for future days, shaping stones, repairing tools, clearing paths. This balance between effort and preparation is easy to overlook, yet it is crucial. The pyramids were not built by exhausting each day to its limit. They were built by managing energy across years. There is something almost meditative about this rhythm. Lift, rest, adjust. Day after day, season after season. The pyramid grew not because any single day was extraordinary, but because no day was wasted. Progress did not need to be visible to be real. When evening approached, the work receded without drama. Stones rested where they were. Tools were set aside. The sun lowered itself behind the plateau, and shadows stretched long across the ground. Back in the settlement, tired bodies found rest, conversations softened, and the world narrowed to the present moment. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the same tasks. And that sameness was not discouraging. It was reassuring. What makes this daily life so compelling is how deeply it contrasts with the myths we discussed earlier. There is nothing supernatural here. Nothing theatrical. And yet, this quiet repetition is precisely what made the pyramids possible. The mystery is not how humans defied their limits, but how they worked within them so skillfully. In imagining this day, we begin to understand something essential. Monumental history is not built from constant intensity. It is built from balance. From knowing when to push and when to pause. From accepting that greatness often grows slowly, almost unnoticed. As the night settles once more over the pyramid fields, the workers sleep, not knowing the future debates their labor will inspire. They do not wonder whether someone, thousands of years later, will question their ability. They simply rest, ready to begin again. And perhaps that is the most mysterious thing of all. Not the stones themselves, but the calm certainty with which they were placed, one after another, by people who trusted the process even when the outcome lay far beyond their own horizon. Soon, we will follow the stones themselves, away from daily routines and into their long, careful journeys across land and water. But for now, let this single day fade gently into night, carrying with it the quiet strength of ordinary effort. When the voices fade and the fires dim, something remains on the plateau long after human footsteps grow quiet. The stones wait. They sit exactly where they were last guided, holding within them the next question of the journey. If ordinary days and patient routines shaped this great work, how did stones of such size ever begin to move at all? This is often the moment when imagination grows impatient. The mind reaches for force, for hidden mechanisms, for some dramatic solution worthy of the weight involved. Yet the truth, once again, is gentler. The stones move not through spectacle, but through understanding. Not through sudden strength, but through patience refined by experience. To the builders, stone was not an adversary. It was a material to be listened to. They learned how it responded to pressure, how it resisted sudden movement, and how it yielded when approached slowly. This knowledge did not come from written theory. It came from repetition so familiar that it became instinct. Each attempt taught the next. Each adjustment left a memory in the hands. Quarrying itself was already part of this quiet education. Many blocks were cut close to the pyramid site, while others came from farther away. Distance did not intimidate the builders, because water had always been their ally. The Nile was more than a river. It was a moving pathway, patient and predictable, flowing in rhythm with the seasons. Stones placed upon boats did not rush. They drifted. Guided by current and careful timing, they arrived not quickly, but reliably. Once on land, the journey slowed further, and this slowness was intentional. Stones were placed on sledges rather than wheels, not because wheels were unknown, but because sledges worked better on sand. Dry sand resists movement, gripping what rests upon it. But sand, when slightly dampened, changes character entirely. A small amount of water transforms resistance into cooperation. Friction softens. The ground becomes smoother. The stone responds. This simple act, darkening the sand with water, does not make the stone light. It makes it manageable. And that difference matters. The builders were not seeking ease. They were seeking control. Ropes tightened. Bodies leaned forward. Feet pressed into the earth. The sledge moved, not in dramatic bursts, but in steady, deliberate increments. Progress was measured in short distances, repeated again and again, with pauses woven naturally into the rhythm. Each pull refined the next. Each movement carried forward what had been learned before. There is something quietly reassuring about this method. No single moment carries the weight of success or failure. Nothing depends on perfect timing or extraordinary strength. Instead, progress accumulates through consistency. The stone moves because people return. Because the ground is prepared. Because water is applied with care. Because patience is treated as a resource, not a delay. Water appears again and again in this story. Not as a force to be mastered, but as a companion to human effort. It cools. It smooths. It carries. It marks level ground. It turns resistance into cooperation. The builders were not working against nature. They were working alongside it, attentive to what it offered and respectful of its limits. As stones approached the growing structure, movement became even more careful. Precision mattered more than speed. Surfaces were prepared. Alignments checked and gently corrected. If a stone resisted, it was not an obstacle to overcome, but a message to interpret. Something needed to shift. Perhaps the angle. Perhaps the surface. Perhaps the timing. There is a subtle humor hidden here, if we allow ourselves to notice it. Modern explanations often assume there must have been a clever shortcut. A secret technique that made everything suddenly easy. But the real secret was accepting that there was no shortcut at all. Only method. Only time. This understanding connects deeply with the rhythm of the builders' lives. the same patience that shaped their days shaped the stone's journey. Pull, pause, adjust. Move, rest. Correct. The rhythm does not change simply because the object is massive. In fact, the larger the stone, the more carefully the rhythm must be preserved. In this way, moving stone becomes almost meditative. It demands attention, presence, and cooperation. Everyone involved must feel the same moment, respond to the same resistance, release at the same time. Individual effort dissolves into collective motion. No one moves the stone alone, and no one claims the movement as their own. As evening approaches once more, the stones come to rest again. They have not traveled far by modern standards, but they have traveled far enough. Enough for today. Enough to continue tomorrow without strain. This is not inefficiency. It is sustainability. When we imagine the pyramids rising from the desert, it is tempting to picture constant motion, stones flying into place, progress visible at every glance. The reality is slower, quieter, and more impressive. The stones move because people trust the process. Because water flows as it always has. Because knowledge accumulates without announcing itself. The mystery here is not hidden technology. It is restraint. The ability to work with forces rather than against them. The wisdom to understand that something worth building cannot be rushed without being diminished. As the air cools and the stones wait once more, another question gently forms. If the stones could move across land and water with such care, how were they guided upward, as the structure grew taller and the path more complex? That answer, too, will unfold slowly. Not as a single solution, but as a series of thoughtful adjustments, shaped by observation and time. By now, the stones no longer feel impatient. After their slow journeys across water and sand, after days of careful pulling and gentle pauses, they seem almost accustomed to waiting. And yet, another question rises with them, quietly but persistently. Moving stone across flat ground is one thing. Guiding it upward, toward a shape that grows taller each season, is another matter entirely. This is the point where many stories become restless again, eager for a single, elegant answer. Surely there must have been one perfect ramp, one master design, one clever structure that explains everything. History, however, rarely rewards such tidy expectations. If we could step back in time and ask the builders which ramp they used, the answer might surprise us. They would likely pause, glance at one another, and ask which year we meant. Which stage? Which side? Because the most reflective truth about pyramid construction is this: the path upward was not fixed. It changed as the pyramid itself changed. This idea can feel oddly modern. We are accustomed to projects that are planned in full before they begin, with every step mapped in advance. But the pyramid was not built from a single frozen blueprint. It was a living project, responsive to its own growth. As the structure rose, the challenges shifted, and the solutions shifted with them. Early on, when the pyramid was still low and wide, moving stone upward was relatively straightforward. Gentle inclines could stretch outward across the plateau. The distance was long, but the angle was forgiving. Stones moved slowly, steadily, following paths that were easy to adjust and repair. Nothing about this stage demanded cleverness. It demanded patience. As the pyramid grew taller, these long ramps became less practical. They took up space, required constant maintenance, and began to interfere with other work. This is where adaptation entered quietly. Shorter ramps, steeper paths, temporary structures built, used, dismantled, and replaced. There was no dramatic announcement of change, no moment of reinvention. Just a gradual realization that yesterday's solution was no longer today's best option. This is where the playful side of history peeks through. Modern debates often argue fiercely over which ramp theory is correct, as if the builders must have chosen one method and stubbornly clung to it for decades. But the evidence suggests something far more flexible. The builders likely used whatever worked best at the time. They experimented. They adjusted. they changed their minds. There is something gently amusing about imagining this process. A group of planners standing at the edge of the rising structure, watching stones move more slowly than before. Exchanging thoughtful looks. Not frustration, but consideration. Then a quiet decision. Let's try it differently. And so they did. Some ramps may have wrapped around the pyramid's sides. Others may have been built against a single face. Some paths may have been internal, hidden briefly within the structure itself before being removed. What matters is not which option was used where, but that none of these possibilities excludes the others. The builders were not searching for perfection. They were searching for progress. This reflects something we have already seen in the daily life of the workers and the movement of stone. Nothing about pyramid construction relied on rigid thinking. It relied on observation. On noticing what worked, what slowed, what strained, and what could be improved with small changes. The pyramid rose not through stubborn repetition, but through attentive adjustment. It is tempting to imagine ancient builders as unwavering, almost ritualistic figures, following inherited rules without question. Yet the ramps tell a different story. They reveal a willingness to adapt, to respond to new circumstances, to accept that large goals require flexible thinking. There is also a quiet humility in this approach. Changing methods does not mean admitting failure. It means recognizing growth. As the pyramid grew heavier and taller, it demanded new responses. The builders listened. They did not force old solutions to carry new weight. This adaptability also explains why physical evidence of ramps is so elusive today. Temporary structures leave temporary traces. Wood decays. Earth is reshaped. Paths are dismantled once their purpose is served. What remains is the stone itself, and the stone does not record the paths that guided it upward. This absence of evidence has often been treated as a mystery. But perhaps it is simply the natural result of a construction process that valued usefulness over permanence. The ramps were never meant to last. They were tools, not monuments. There is something quietly soothing about this realization. The pyramids, for all their endurance, were built with the help of things that were allowed to disappear. Not everything needed to survive. Only what mattered most. As we reflect on this changing landscape of paths and ramps, it becomes easier to let go of the desire for a single answer. The pyramid does not ask us to solve it like a puzzle. It asks us to understand it like a process. One that unfolded over time, guided by observation, cooperation, and a willingness to adjust. And perhaps this is where the real mystery softens into wisdom. The builders did not know the final shape in every detail when they began. They trusted that they would learn what they needed along the way. Stone by stone. Season by season. As the pyramid rose higher against the sky, so did their understanding. And as night fell once more across the plateau, the paths rested, just like the stones, waiting to be reshaped again tomorrow. In the next quiet stretch of our journey, we will look even more closely at the precision that emerged from this flexible process. At how alignment, measurement, and accuracy grew not from machines, but from careful attention to earth, sky, and time itself. For now, let the ramps fade gently into the darkness, their work complete, their presence remembered not in ruins, but in the steady rise they made possible. By now, the pyramid no longer feels like an object being built. It feels more like a presence that is slowly revealing itself. Stone by stone, layer by layer. It begins to speak, not loudly, not urgently, but in a language of balance, alignment, and time. If earlier moments were about movement and method, this part of the story turns inward. It becomes contemplative. The question is no longer only how the pyramid rose, but how the builders knew when it was right. Construction at this stage was not merely physical labor. It was a form of listening. Each new layer responded to the one beneath it. Each surface reflected decisions made long before the stone arrived. The pyramid was not assembled in isolation from thought. It was shaped by attention. height introduces a new kind of silence. As the structure rose, the noise of the ground softened. The sounds of hauling and calling faded with distance. Upward, the air moved differently. The desert wind brushed exposed stone, and shadows lengthened across surfaces still warm from the sun. Those working higher were no longer surrounded by the familiar rhythm of the camp. They stood between earth and sky, where perspective shifts quietly. At this elevation, precision mattered in ways that could not be corrected later. A slight misalignment below would echo upward, becoming more visible, more permanent. This is where patience became almost ceremonial. Stones were checked not once, but repeatedly. Edges were aligned with care. Angles were measured using simple tools guided by experience and observation, not abstract calculation. The builders trusted their eyes, their hands, and the steady repetition of what had already proven true. The pyramid itself was a kind of conversation between geometry and gravity. Each stone pressed downward while also leaning inward. Weight was not something to resist, but something to distribute. The structure grew stable not by standing stiffly, but by settling into itself. It learned its own balance as it rose. There is poetry in this kind of construction, though the builders would not have called it that. It is poetry made of stone and shadow, of lines that meet without strain. Every choice was practical, yet together they formed something that feels intentional beyond necessity. The pyramid did not need to be beautiful to function, but it became beautiful because it functioned so well. Time moved differently here. Days passed without dramatic change. Progress could not always be seen from one morning to the next. And yet, the builders returned, steady and unhurried, trusting that accumulation would speak for itself. This kind of trust is rare. It requires faith not in outcomes, but in process. As layers climbed higher, the paths used to reach them adapted again. Ramps shifted. Angles softened. Materials changed slightly to meet new demands. There was no single design frozen from the beginning. Instead, the pyramid grew through conversation with its own form. The builders responded to what existed, not to an abstract ideal imagined far in advance. This adaptability reveals something deeply human. The builders did not pretend to know everything at the start. They allowed the structure to guide them. When something worked, it was repeated. When it resisted, it was reconsidered. Progress came not from certainty, but from attention. In moments of rest, one can imagine workers standing quietly, looking out over the desert from this new height. The Nile glimmered in the distance. The land unfolded in calm familiarity. From here, the world felt larger and smaller at once. The labor below seemed distant, while the sky felt close enough to touch. Such moments do not rush. They linger. The pyramid was not just a tomb or a monument. It was a marker of time spent well. Each stone recorded hours of effort, moments of pause, small decisions made carefully. It embodied a way of working that valued continuity over urgency. As the structure neared its upper reaches, something subtle changed. The pyramid no longer needed to prove its strength. Its presence was already assured. The remaining work was about refinement, about bringing closure to what had been patiently begun. The pace slowed further, if that was even possible. Finishing is often quieter than beginning. What stands out most is what is absent. There is no evidence of panic, no sign of reckless acceleration as the end approached. The builders did not rush to complete the work. They allowed it to conclude naturally, as a conversation reaches its final, gentle understanding. In this light, the pyramid becomes less a mystery of engineering and more a reflection of values. It shows what can be achieved when people accept limits, respect materials, and give time the space it needs to unfold. It reminds us that endurance is often quieter than ambition. As the sun lowers and shadows stretch longer across the stone, the pyramid seems to rest within itself. Not finished in a single moment, but settled. Complete not because the last stone was placed, but because nothing more needed to be said. And still, one question remains, drifting gently in the evening air. When the stones were finally at rest, when the builders stepped back and silence returned to the plateau, what did this immense effort mean to those who made it? That meaning, like the structure itself, was shaped slowly. And it carries us toward the final reflections of this long, patient story. When the final stones settled into their places and the last tools were carried away, something rare happened on the plateau. For the first time in many years, there was no sound of work. No voices calling across the sand, no rhythm of pulling ropes, no measured pauses between effort and rest. The pyramid stood alone. Complete not in triumph, but in stillness. This silence was not empty. It was full in a way that only long labor can make possible. The structure did not announce itself. It simply remained, absorbing light, casting shadow, breathing heat in the day and releasing it slowly at night. The builders did not leave behind a spectacle. They left behind a presence. What followed was not abandonment, but transition. The pyramid entered a different phase of its existence, one that required no hands to sustain it. Wind replaced footsteps. Sunlight replaced firelight. Time itself became the only worker still active, smoothing edges almost imperceptibly, softening surfaces grain by grain. To those who had built it, the pyramid was never meant to be rushed through with the eyes. It was meant to be approached gradually, its scale revealing itself over time. From a distance, it appeared simple. Closer, it became immense. Closer still, it became intimate, each stone carrying the memory of touch. And then, gradually, the builders faded into the background of history. Their names were not carved into the stones. Their voices were not preserved. What remained was their method, embedded quietly into the structure itself. Anyone willing to look closely could still see it. The alignment that holds, the balance that endures, the patience that refuses to disappear. Centuries passed, and interpretations began to shift. Later observers brought their own assumptions, their own expectations of spectacle and force. Faced with something so large and precise, they searched for explanations that felt equally dramatic. The idea that ordinary people, working steadily over time, could achieve such results seemed almost disappointing. Too quiet. Too human. But the pyramid resists these projections. It does not reward haste or exaggeration. It does not reveal itself all at once. It asks for the same quality that created it, attention. Seen through this lens, the pyramid becomes less a puzzle to be solved and more a lesson to be absorbed. It reminds us that scale does not require chaos, that precision does not require complexity, and that endurance does not require speed. It invites us to reconsider what we think is possible when time is treated not as an enemy, but as an ally. There is something deeply calming about this realization. It shifts the story away from mystery and toward meaning. The pyramid does not need secrets to be impressive. It needs only context. Standing before it, one senses a continuity that extends beyond any single generation. The builders worked knowing they would not see the structure weather centuries. They were not working for personal recognition. They were working within a shared understanding of purpose that stretched beyond individual lifetimes. This kind of thinking feels distant today, yet it resonates quietly when given space. The pyramid becomes a mirror, reflecting our own relationship with time. How often do we rush what could benefit from patience? How often do we assume complexity where consistency would suffice? As night falls over the plateau, the structure changes character once more. The sharpness of daylight softens. Edges blur gently into shadow. The pyramid does not disappear. It settles. It becomes part of the landscape in a way that feels inevitable, as though it has always belonged there. This belonging is perhaps its greatest achievement. Not domination of the environment, but integration with it. The pyramid stands not in opposition to the desert, but in conversation with it. Stone answers sand. Shadow answers sun. Stillness answers motion. Long after its builders are gone, this conversation continues. Each generation approaches with new questions, new theories, new expectations. And the pyramid responds in the same way it always has, silently, steadily, without urgency. It does not correct misunderstandings directly. It waits. Over time, some explanations fall away, unable to sustain themselves against the quiet evidence of what remains. Others soften, becoming closer to the truth without needing to announce themselves as such. In this way, the pyramid teaches not through instruction, but through presence. It shows us that meaning does not always need to be explained to be felt. That understanding can arrive slowly, without force. That what endures often does so because it was built with care, not haste. As we sit with this image, the story begins to shift again. We move away from the builders, away from the structure itself, and toward the modern world that continues to look back at it. The pyramid has been standing quietly for a very long time. The question now is not how it was built, but how we choose to listen to it. That reflection carries us gently forward, toward a final consideration of what the pyramids reveal, not about ancient ingenuity alone, but about our own expectations. And the stories we tell when silence makes us uncomfortable. Long after the last footsteps faded from the plateau, something else arrived in their place. Stories. They came slowly at first, then in greater numbers, carried by travelers. Scholars, rulers, and dreamers who stood before the pyramids and felt a quiet discomfort rise within them. The structure was too calm, too vast, too patient. Silence, when it stretches across centuries, invites explanation. Human minds are not fond of unanswered stillness. When confronted with something that does not speak, we speak for it. And so, over time, the pyramids became wrapped in layers of storytelling, each generation adding its own voice, its own assumptions, its own need for wonder. Some stories were born from admiration. Others from disbelief. Many from the uneasy feeling that something so enduring must contain secrets beyond ordinary understanding. The idea that careful planning, shared labor, and long patience could produce such a result felt almost unsettling. It suggested that greatness might be quieter than expected. And so the narratives grew more dramatic. Hidden knowledge. Lost civilizations. Sudden leaps of brilliance that appeared and vanished without trace. These stories shimmered with excitement, offering mystery where calm explanations seemed insufficient. They filled the silence with spectacle. Yet the pyramid itself remained unchanged. It neither confirmed nor denied these ideas. It did not respond to myth with correction. It simply continued to stand, asking nothing. Offering nothing beyond what was already visible. What is striking is how much these stories reveal not about the pyramid, but about us. Faced with slow achievement, we imagine shortcuts. Faced with collective effort, we search for singular genius. Faced with patience, we invent urgency. The pyramid challenges these instincts without confrontation. Its stones do not shout their origin. They whisper it, over and over, in the language of alignment, repetition, and restraint. The message is subtle enough to be ignored, yet persistent enough to endure. In quieter moments, when the excitement of speculation fades, another kind of understanding becomes possible. One that does not require mystery to feel meaningful. One that allows ordinary human effort to be extraordinary precisely because it is sustained. This shift in perspective can feel almost disappointing at first. There is less drama. Fewer secrets. No sudden revelation that resolves everything at once. Instead, there is a gentle realization that what happened here was not miraculous in isolation, but remarkable in accumulation. The pyramid does not belong to a single moment of inspiration. It belongs to thousands of small decisions made consistently over time. Decisions to prepare the ground, to adjust the angle, to pause rather than force, to return the next day and continue. These are not the elements of legend. They are the elements of endurance. And yet, endurance rarely satisfies our appetite for wonder. We prefer stories that arrive fully formed, rather than those that grow slowly. We prefer solutions that feel clever, rather than those that feel careful. The pyramid stands as a quiet counterargument to these preferences. In its presence, time feels different. Urgency dissolves. The need for immediate explanation softens. One begins to notice how the light moves across the stone, how shadows trace the geometry, how the structure changes character without ever changing form. Meaning emerges not through discovery, but through attention. Perhaps this is why the pyramid continues to inspire new stories. Each generation approaches it with fresh expectations, and when those expectations are unmet, imagination steps in to bridge the gap. Mystery becomes a comfort, a way to preserve wonder without confronting patience. But there is another option, quieter and more demanding. To sit with the silence. To accept that some achievements are impressive precisely because they were not rushed, not dramatic, not singular. To recognize that the pyramid is less a riddle to be solved than a reminder to slow down. In this way, the stories we tell about the pyramids become a reflection of how we relate to time itself. Do we respect it, or try to outsmart it? Do we work with it, or attempt to leap over it? The answers shift with each era, but the structure remains, gently inviting reconsideration. As night deepens and the stars trace familiar paths above the plateau, the pyramid seems almost to recede into the darkness, its edges softened by shadow. It does not disappear. It rests. And in that rest, it offers something rare, permission to let questions remain unanswered a little longer. The most enduring stories, after all, are not always the loudest ones. They are the ones that continue quietly, shaping thought without demanding attention. The pyramid has been telling such a story for a very long time. As we approach the final moments of this journey, one last reflection waits patiently. If the pyramid teaches us anything beyond history, beyond construction, beyond myth, it may be this, that what lasts is often built slowly, understood gradually, and appreciated most fully when we stop trying to make it speak louder than it ever intended to. And with that thought, the story prepares to settle into its final calm, where explanation gives way to rest, and understanding no longer needs words. As the story draws to its quiet close, there is no final revelation waiting in the darkness, no hidden mechanism suddenly revealed beneath the moonlight. There is only the pyramid itself, resting exactly as it has for thousands of years, unchanged by the questions we bring to it, unmoved by the urgency of our explanations. In this stillness, the need to solve gives way to the comfort of simply observing. Night settles gently over the plateau. The air cools. The desert exhales. The stone, warm from the day, releases its heat slowly, as if remembering the long hours of sunlight that shaped its surface. Shadows soften the edges, turning sharp lines into calm silhouettes. The pyramid no longer stands as a monument to effort, but as a quiet companion to time. At this hour, the builders feel closer than they ever did in daylight. Not as figures to be named or measured, but as presences woven into the stone itself. Their patience lingers in every alignment. Their restraint rests in every balanced layer. Nothing about the structure feels hurried, and nothing about it feels unfinished. The questions that once demanded answers grow quieter now. How are the stones lifted? How are the paths shaped? How are the angles perfected? These questions do not vanish, but they loosen their grip. They become softer, less insistent, like thoughts that drift through the mind just before sleep, no longer needing resolution. What remains is a sense of rhythm. Day followed night. Effort followed rest. Stone followed stone. Over time, the pyramid emerged not through force, but through repetition so gentle it almost disappears. This rhythm continues even now, long after the work has ended. The sun rises and sets. The stars return to familiar places. The structure listens, as it always has. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that such a vast creation was not the result of urgency or excess, but of balance. It suggests that lasting things do not require constant attention. They require care, and then they require space. Standing before the pyramid in the quiet of night, one feels less like a visitor and more like a moment passing through something larger. The structure does not ask to be understood completely. It allows partial understanding. It allows rest. And perhaps this is the pyramid's final gift. Not an answer, but an example. It shows that meaning does not need to announce itself. That patience can shape stone. That time, when respected, can carry even the heaviest weight without strain. As the desert grows still and the sky deepens, the pyramid seems to settle further into the earth, as though it has always belonged exactly here. The long work is over. The conversation has ended. Silence remains. Not as absence, but as completion. In this silence, it becomes easier to let go. To release the urge to explain, to categorize, to resolve. The story has reached a place where it no longer moves forward. It simply rests. And so, as the night stretches on and the stars keep their quiet watch, the pyramid remains, holding nothing, demanding nothing, offering only the steady reassurance that some things endure precisely because they were never rushed. Let the image fade slowly now. Let the questions drift. Let the stone remain where it is. There is nothing more it needs to tell us. And there is nothing more we need to ask.